"You are not here to argue, Rilt. You are here to witness." The words dropped like a sealed verdict, echoing across the council forum chamber, layered in the sterile chill of juridical formality. The Varn executor Zelkar Thin stood tall on the adjudicator's platform, his obsidian council garb trimmed in kinetic thread lines that pulsed with motion trace algorithms, not as fashion, but as status markers of legal authority. No movement in that chamber went undocumented. Commander Tavon Rilt didn't flinch. He remained motionless in the third-row envoy gallery, spine straight, jaw braced. The delegation chair beneath him had no backrest, as if even Earth's protest deserved discomfort. His eyes were locked on the crimson data bar sliding across the council chamber's front core display. Protocol verdict. High-risk species designation confirmed. Execution warrant enforced. System architect Derek Halvran. Charge. Deployment of unrestricted synthetic combat chains in violation of Article 7.5. 2 security drones hovered into position, not by request but expectation. Rilt's credentials pinged invalid on both intercept arrays. A passive reminder. Earth is not a signatory with weight in this room. Executor Thin, Rilt began, tone clipped. Earth's protest relay carries diplomatic weight under the original Accord compacts. This tribunal... You forfeited your position when your engineer constructed autonomous systemic nodes across non-combatant sectors, Thin interrupted. His voice was scorched glass, each word fused with contempt rather than malice. We measure peace by containment. Your kind measures it by delay. Rilt's fingernails pressed against the embedded bioskin strip along his wrist panel. Below his uniform sleeve, an embedded transmission beacon pulsed green. Not for Earth, not for defense, for record. He wasn't here to change outcomes. He was here to record everything. Caressed the tiered council chamber. 1,000 representatives from rival species observed in curated stillness, eyes reflecting the diffused shimmer from the core display, the execution platform lit in slow-burning amber. Not a single gaze turned to Earth's seat. Not even the low-level aides from neutral systems glanced his way. Derek Halvran was already in transit. He was marched through Corridor 7. Not shackled. That would have implied danger. The Dominion didn't believe in symbolic restraints. Halvran walked with a bio-negil restraint field around his forearms, a technology designed to disable thought-based activation signals, not physical violence. He wasn't seen as a warrior. He was a threat because he'd thought something. No cameras followed him, just autopathing witness drones, cataloging biometric metrics in real time. His pupils dilated under the corridor's ultraviolet directional lighting. Nanomesh tendrils across his scalp registered a heat spike, but no twitch. His gait was even, pulse rate stable. Executor Thin's voice activated across the chamber. Let the chamber mark. The accused arrives by his own cognition. No compulsion. No resistance. No admission. The forum doors dilated, each panel retracting with mechanical cadence that resembled bone being drawn through sockets. Halvran stepped forward. Rilt felt something shift, not in the room, but deep in the stomach, like watching a dam wall form cracks that hadn't been visible until the second before collapse. There were no words spoken by Halvran, no final statement aloud, no public declaration. That would have offered dignity, and the council had already stripped that away when they declared his systems beyond reasonable comprehension. The dais rose hydraulically. A suspended arch from above activated with segmented arcs of violet current. Below Halvran's chest, a metachain synchronized his neurofeedback rhythms, preparing for cortical shutdown. Not a drop of blood would be spilled. This wasn't execution by violence. It was execution by sterility. A synthetic chime punctuated the beginning of the process. The chamber grew heavier, not in sound but in a kind of psychological compression. Attention bent toward the platform. Halvran stood with head upright, eyes steady, not prideful, not broken, just unreadable. The chain pulsed once, then again, then ceased. Rilt rose to his feet as the official timestamp finalized. The data entry blinked on the display overhead. Execution complete. Life terminated at 14:39 and 57 seconds. Civic record logged. No clapping, no reaction. The council regarded Earth's role as concluded. Commander Rilt, said a voice from the side tier. Ambassador Drove Karn, a neutral delegate from the Deltrian Partition, one of the Accord's original framers. His eyes, too round for a face that smooth, stared at Rilt with practiced neutrality. You may now submit your statement. It will be archived, not reviewed. I have none, Rilt replied flatly. There was a pause. Karn expected an argument. Expected pleading. He was one of those who had lobbied for the warrant. Not out of malice, but strategy. The Dominion didn't fear Earth's weapons. They feared the predictive system webs Halvrin had left behind. Karn's brow lifted. You surprise me. You won't enjoy the next one. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a tone shift. Just a data point. Rilt turned and exited the gallery. He didn't push the door sensor. It opened for him. The bioscan had already registered his departure cue. In the viewing bay behind the chamber, Earth's internal diplomatic system displayed 3 lines on a low-specific launch visual area, embedded discreetly inside the thick bronze ridges of Rilt's uniform cuff. Valkyr nodes, stage 0 initiated. Latency clock minus 61,223. Activation. Waiting trigger. Point. Rilt did not blink. He did not transmit. He just walked. Inside the council chamber, Executor Thin deactivated his authority display and motioned for the gallery to resume standard proceedings. The next case involved a dispute over orbital mining tariffs in the Vicari Trine system. The forum began to repopulate its attention. No one lingered on Earth. No one noticed the uncharted relay buoy drifting inside Varn's outer orbital mesh, registering its first synchronization pulse since the Scarvex initiative collapsed 31 years ago. Down in the diplomatic vessel's holding bay, Rilt entered a shielded cabin and removed his command band. The room smelled of polymerized sealant and plastimineral dust. No filtration running. He placed the band into a socket, and his data panel displayed a silent feed from a decommissioned scout drone, marked as Civilian Relay 772K. On screen, 3 abandoned orbital husks near the Varn perimeter flickered blue. Once, then off. He tapped one command. It didn't transmit a signal, it simply altered availability status. The Valkar nodes began listening. If the council triggers the verdict, don't wait for anyone to blink. Let the system do what it was built for. Those were Halvarin's last off-record instructions, issued through a classified neural relay minutes before boarding the diplomatic carrier. His voice was level, devoid of urgency, as if discussing adjustments to a satellite's cooling array, not the global failover of humanity's most untraceable deterrent. Operative Quarn Daisel stood inside the relay chamber beneath Earth's southern archival core, surrounded by dormant racks lined with null temporal casing. Each black crystalline node stored time-sealed code clusters, physically inaccessible without both retinal imprint and thought-tuned waveform key. His pulse elevated slightly as the injection band finished calibrating. One wrong word, one emotional spike above threshold, and access would collapse behind neurocircuit burnouts. There were no backups. Daisel leaned forward. The retinal lens scanned. A sharp thermal sting snapped against his cornea. Not pain, but warning. Access granted. The terminal displayed no welcome. Just a single prompt pulsing at the bottom of the feed. Mirror key loaded. Execute or observe. He selected observe. Alvaran's archived build log flickered into view, line by line. Not a diary, not speculation, but schema entries and layer assignments detailing Oblivion Strand. There were no timestamps. Time didn't matter when encoding entropy structures. 2 years earlier, deep beneath the Carves fault array, Halvarin stood surrounded by engineers who never knew they were working on a weapon. The chamber wasn't large, but what hung in the center of it, Valcar Node 0, didn't need size to demand attention. It looked like a collapsed sphere, broken in motion and frozen mid-disintegration. Its form shifted based on observation vector, reacting not with hostility but with quantum camouflage tuned to human biothresholds. The engineers believed it was a power regulation experiment for deep space cargo tethers. Halvran had designed the misdirection into their operating parameters. "Sir, this thing's refusing to register static mass," one of them muttered. Halvran stepped forward, took a stylus, and marked a line onto the sensor plate. "That's because it doesn't exist the same way twice. Just treat it as an environmental factor, not a target." Another tech raised a concern. "It absorbed a tool yesterday." Like, absorbed. No flash, no sound, just gone. Halvran nodded. "It won't do that without authorization, and none of you are authorized." The room went still, but not because of fear. They didn't fully understand what he'd just said. Back in the present, Daisel scrolled deeper into the log. Subroutine after subroutine, each encoded in datafold logic. An approach where every command folded over itself in nested ambiguity. Only when called in sequence would it unravel its full structure. This meant no algorithm could simulate or scan it in advance. The code couldn't be understood, it could only be followed. Halvran had used recycled scrap technology to hide the nodes. The sensor dampeners of abandoned cargo haulers, the decaying cores of retired scout drones, a network that never activated because it never needed to exist, until the verdict arrived. Daisel accessed a sublog tagged Orchid Threat Assessment. A quiet entry, not a warning. Just a philosophical note from Halvran. "They think erasure must be loud. I disagree. True consequence occurs without arrival, without gesture. When denial is final, not through fire, but through logic." In one archive session, Halvran is seen alone inside a pre-deployment vault. A single mirror key rests in his palm. A data crystal shaped like a rhombus, dull gray, smooth to the eye but textured against skin, as if layered with static tension. He speaks to the node, not for transmission, but for record. "You were never designed to respond to attack. That would make you reactionary. You exist to end sequences, not disrupt them. And when they ask why their ships are gone, when they search the telemetry and find absence instead of impact, they'll realize something far more terrifying than defeat. They'll realize their definitions were too limited." He places the mirror key into a thermal chamber. No fanfare, no password. The quantum archive where Daisel now stood vibrated as Node 12 initialized in passive listening mode. There was no light, no indicator, only the gentle shift in environmental ion charge, a whisper across the base of his spine. As the room accepted that something had changed, his comm band blinked twice, then returned to idle. No follow-up, no confirmation. That, too, had been Halvran's design. Any system that acknowledged deployment was flawed by exposure. In the briefing chamber prior to Halvran's departure to the Helios Forum, Rilt had asked only one question. "Why leave the final switch in our hands?" Halvran had looked up from his projection schematic, an analog diagram etched on transparent flex film, which no digital system could trace. "Because if it activates without your consent, we become no better than them?" Rilt had nodded, then turned the flex film around. The schematic was unreadable. Dozens of arrows, threads, and variant routing paths converging on what looked like a black void labeled "Conclusion Point, not Terminal, defined." "Don't try to build more of these," Halvran had said, collecting the film. "Don't even document it. This isn't scalable. This is singular." One final answer. Now as Daisel stepped out of the archive chamber, his skin tingled with residual static. Not danger, not radiation, just presence. 3 confirmation pings flicked across his portable console, each tagged from sectors where Earth had no current installations. He whispered under his breath, as if anyone might hear it. "They're awake, no expressions, no gestures, not even a nod, do you understand?" The handler didn't wait for a reply. He simply stepped back as the neural damper affixed itself around Halvran's cranial crown, a crown of slender carbon-latticed filaments that pierced skin not to wound but to reroute, disconnecting higher functions from motor response. Thought remained, expression was removed. A public display stripped of personality. It wasn't death by cruelty, it was termination through bureaucracy. Halvran stood still as the chamber lights dimmed in phased bands, each flicker signaling synchronization with System Broadcast Relay 48. The chamber deepened in color, not in tone but density. Muted violet veiling the lower levels of the Helios Forum. Rows of delegates remained fixed in their seats. No audible discussion. No movement of pens, no shared murmurs. Only the slow data flow rippling across head-level display lenses tethered to their collars, each linked to personal observation records. Above them, anchored high into the angular ceiling, the heads-up relay array focused its tracking feed downward toward the center dais. There, framed in reactive shielding, Halvran stood with his boots placed on two concentric rings etched into the tribunal floor. Each ring represented verdicts. The inner circle, confirmed threat. The outer, unreformable entity. The rings glowed. Only one. From Earth Command, Commander Tavon Rilt watched through a one-way priority stream, uncompressed, raw data feed. No filters, no council stabilization codecs. The image flickered with genuine transmission noise, giving every shift of Halvran's chest weight and weightlessness at once. The room around Rilt was dim, populated only by primary observation staff and two high-rank monitors seated behind staggered display towers. The air carried the synthetic scent of recycled mesh paper and static-charged fabrics. One of the guards beside him adjusted his cuff slightly. Rilt didn't turn. A mechanical whisper from the forum filled the chamber floor. The neural sequence anchor dropped from the ceiling with a hiss. Not hydraulic, but kinetic steam reversal. It hovered just above Halvran's head, three curved prongs lining up with skull-embedded transnodes. Once connected, it would suppress cognition at the cortical root. Zelkarthin, executor of the Varn Dominion, raised his right hand, a gesture not of command but signal transmission. He didn't speak. His augmented gauntlet sent direct confirmation to the tribunal spine. The scaffold locked. A glow passed through the floor, a blue ring cycling through 82 decision vectors. Each frame displayed the council emblem from participating species. The rotation completed in 7 seconds. All marks turned inward. All votes had confirmed. Railt's expression didn't change, but one of his fingertips rested lightly against the secure trigger band strapped along his leg. Not to launch anything, just a grounding ritual. On the tribunal display, lines of system broadcast data danced through a secondary channel, each mapped to audience sectors from core-packed worlds to low-orbit borderlands. It wasn't just the execution of a human. It was the message that Terran autonomy was neither immune nor exempt. A display tower near Ralph's periphery flashed once. Earth Secondary Feed Node 7, asymmetric. Viewing systems, 48 galactic sectors. Stream classification. Public deterrent display. The scaffold pulsed, not with light, but with neuromagnetic inversion. A technique that collapsed higher brain function while preserving vegetative reflexes for visual confirmation. Halvran's eyelids twitched once. Then, nothing. He didn't drop, he didn't sway, he just ceased responding. No sound cue followed, just an update line across every tribunal viewer. Cognitive termination. Confirmed. Direct Halvran. Execution time code, 1439 and 57 seconds. Back in the relay vault on Earth, Operative Korn Dasel marked the time on a manual slate, not digital, not traceable. He pressed the timestamp into wax with a physical seal. One word engraved beneath. Unlocked. He didn't speak. He didn't signal. The Valkar nodes wouldn't need a trigger. They were waiting for confirmation of cessation. Back at Helios Forum, Halvran's body was removed without ceremony. No guards. No restraints. A pair of mechanized lifters guided the platform downward through the base shaft. The tribunal shifted immediately to the next docket. No eulogy. No mention. Just the next petition. Planetary zoning conflict in the Venturic Reach. Thin leaned forward in his chair, wrist flicking to dismiss the previous verdict entry from his field. Let Earth observe consequences, they'll understand now. A junior tactician beside him hesitated. What if they react differently? Thin responded without turning. Then we will know them fully. And we will end them thoroughly. Inside Earth's data recovery vault, Rilt remained unmoved. Behind him, the tertiary observer leaned closer. Sir, would you like us to pull the stream feed now? Martha made a gesture of impatience. Rilt didn't respond immediately. He watched as the feed cut to static, not because the signal was dropped, but because the execution event had no continuation. There was nothing more to show. It ended because there was no content remaining. The machine didn't need to fade out. The council didn't require applause. Archive the last 7 seconds only, Rilt finally said. Secure channel, do not share. Understood, Commander. He stood, adjusted his outer collar, and tapped the side of his band. A small interface blinked once. Session observed. Edgen. Engaged. He walked past the observers, past the security staff, and into the corridor leading toward Relay Bay 6. The corridor's light sensor adjusted as he passed beneath each strip, temperature dropping by 0.5 degree with each segment. The chamber at the end opened before him, not because of access codes, but because he was expected. A single console stood inside the chamber. No seat, no screen, just a single rectangular block lined with manual levers. Redundant analog interface, the kind not used in centuries, except for contingency-class systems. He placed his palm on the copper ring. One phrase appeared in red text along the top band. Wait state complete, confirm reception of finality, mark the ping, confirm latency drift. Don't engage, observe only. The directive came from Operative Dazel, his tone steady as the temperature-controlled relay station hissed into operational sync. He stood alone in a subgrid monitoring annex beneath Earth Command's tertiary node hub. No staff, no chatter, no cross-channel audio. Just data threads unfolding across a narrow field of heads-up panels, each line a different system echo bouncing off dormant Terran debris now stirring on the edge of non-affiliated sectors. One thread blinked yellow, then red, then vanished. He didn't react. That ping wasn't a signal. It was a diagnostic artifact, confirmation that the Valkar nodes had shifted from passive observation to active sync chain recognition. One by one, the abandoned structures parked in forgotten orbits began adjusting their alignment vectors. Not toward any star, not toward Earth, but toward each other. They weren't triangulating a strike. They were sharing entropy maps, streamless, loadless, untrackable outside of raw memory drift. Basil brought up the dust-layered firmware list from the satellite scrapyard orbiting Draston Minor. 12,000 clicks from the nearest council patrol line. Each of the 17 listed derelicts had long been declared navigation hazards. 3 no longer existed. The others showed minor status changes. Rotation pattern adjustments, thermal bloom regulation, and non-standard reinitialization of low primordial subsystems. On the surface, nothing. To any outsider, the same collection of dead machinery. But Daisel wasn't looking at surfaces. He tapped into one of the decommissioned comm relay husks, tagged as 872 LRC Light Carrier Junk Class. The internal diagnostic report streamed back with strange anomalies, subroutines and languages no longer supported, memory sectors reorganized into mirror logics, and internal sensors rerouted toward non-tactical pattern vectors. A configuration only readable through Halvrin's entropy templates. Earth Command received no notifications. That, too, was by design. 2 decks above, Commander Taven Rilt stood in a reinforced observatory bay, arms folded behind his back, gaze fixed through a polarized viewing port as a relay drone spiraled into the launch arc for outbound confirmation pulses. His breath fogged faintly against the inner seal. The room was quiet, insulated with acoustic dampening film to prevent any echo distortions during extended monitoring periods. One foot tapped a silent pattern against the floor's fiber plate. Not anxiety, just calculation. A transmission board flickered behind him. A technician, seated low at the control desk, muttered. Sector 9 Luzetta reports minor vector drift across 3 former asset frames. One had its heat shunt re-angled. Timestamp, Rolt said without looking back. 4 minutes, 39 seconds after 14, 39 and 57 seconds. He exhaled once, crisp. Then the system heard the verdict. Across the galaxy, remnants of Earth's outdated tech biomes, old research vessels, disused relay beacons and shuttered mining pylons, began to register fractional signal latency adjustments. The differences were nanometric. Thermal output curve variance, rerouting of non-essential backups and shifts in passive sensor orientation. None transmitted, none broadcasted. They simply began listening in a new way. On council-controlled frequencies, no anomalies were logged. On Varn Dominion patrol routes, not a single incident warranted report. No alert levels changed. Because the changes were non-violent. Subtle, surgical, and irreversible. Back in the subgrid annex, Dysel pulled open a terminal drawer embedded into the far wall. Inside, wrapped in ultra-thin insulation, lay one of Halvrin's mirror keys, untouched since initial design. Its casing shimmered with barely contained static arcs. Not electricity, not ion flow, just interference. A language few systems could understand and no council tech could decrypt. He didn't insert it. He didn't have to. The key was just a contingency. The nodes had already begun the syncing process, based solely on observational timestamp markers encoded into Halvran's original protocol. Execution equals activation. No override. No consent required. His only task now was to monitor reconfiguration speed across Tier 3 spectrums and ensure node hive redundancy loops didn't cascade too rapidly. If they surged too quickly, Council deep scan bots might register the energy signature overlay. The mirror key pulsed once in his palm, not for response, but for range test alignment. He watched as Node 13A, formerly logged as scavenger drone Ecliptic, shifted its stabilization rings toward a derelict carrier 3,000 kilometers away. Then another node, flagged Hauler 9 Delta, pinged back with a confirmation timestamp. This wasn't an offensive maneuver, it was a handshake sequence across repurposed corpses. In the lower diplomatic quadrant of Earth Command, inbound requests from 3 Council species blinked urgently on a side console. None were answered. Earth's delegation channels remained closed. Every message marked "Request to discuss outcome of tribunal" was rerouted to a buffer station with no autoresponder. To the galaxy, Earth had gone completely quiet. The reality. Earth was watching, listening, and preparing. A minor planetary satellite orbiting the dry rock moon Vorkareth adjusted its internal temperature by 0.3 degrees and expelled a burst of ionized gas, masked as a decay vent. In truth, it released an atmospheric sample capture from 41 years ago. The first known failure of a Council biocontainment pod, which Halvran had once studied under restricted clearance. That sample wasn't just data, it was the template for timeline anchoring calibration. One of the final components needed for the Valkar node network to rethread itself across system memory frames. Dysel closed the drawer. The mirror key's edges no longer shimmered. It had received enough to finish sync estimation. He moved to the central console, tapped 3 commands, and shut down all local displays. Nothing was to remain cached. No logs, no trails, just the changes in space. He whispered, not to himself, not to anyone, just as a form of notation. Phase drift will complete before the Varn even realize what's not pointing at them anymore. This isn't an error, this is systemic vanishing. We're looking at subtraction, not destruction. Commander Revik Doran slammed both palms onto the tactical frame as his fleet control bridge drowned in cascading data voids. The Varn Dominion's 7th phalanx, 213 vessels strong, had ceased visual return inside 4 minutes. They hadn't warped out. They hadn't been breached. They had ceased. He pulled up his neural link relay, dragging 3 overlays into his forward field. Each heads-up panel pulsed red across the fleet alignment map. Empty vector shells. Ships still recorded as present by satellite positioners, but absent in gravimetric echo. To the Dominion command structure, this was impossible. But impossible had already happened. At 4:22 GST, deep-range sector beacon Krelna V2 logged the final positional marker of the dreadnought Orak Helvier. Its heat signature still present, but no mass registered. The onboard AI from monitoring satellite Cifra Chain 18 looped the same line across multiple relay channels. Confirmed. Vessel energy imprint retained. Material presence undefined. Requery, physical occupancy, echo not established. In Doran's command pit, the static of overlapping sensor rejection hissed through proximity tracking lanes. One technician at the rear console muttered, "They're pinging, Commander, but there's nothing for the signal to bounce off. They're returning echoes from their own absences." Run that again in plain language. They're there, but they're not. Remembered. At Fleet Coordination Hub Eccletorin, 9 sub-commanders issued dispersal commands across scattered flotillas, but their messages terminated mid-cascade. Not blocked, not jammed. Simply null-routed, as though the intended recipients had never existed. One comms officer stammered into the open channel, "There's no feedback latency, no countermeasure spike, no radiation trail. If this was a mass collapse event, we'd see signature ripple. We don't even get ion scatter." Then across every Dominion fleet bridge currently online, the same entry blinked across the lower frame of their internal status HUDs. Phase negative, field registered. Quantum anchor loss detected. Echo density below, observability threshold. The readings weren't consistent with weapon strikes. They resembled data corruption at a physical level. Back at Doran's bridge, a sensor AI flickered with a theory tree labeled Tactical Evaluation, Entropy Loop Event. He didn't even get to read it fully before the ship Vescarl's End vanished from the visual net. One blink. Then, absence. A technician shouted from below, "They didn't explode, they just blanked. It's like the system redacted them from motion." Joran bared his teeth, but no words came. He yanked the override node from the command rail and shoved it into the emergency diagnostic interface. Nothing fed back. Not a scramble. Not interference. Just emptiness, where function had been. 3 jumps away, monitor vessel Havix 22, assigned to long-range observation, began recording gravitational feedback anomalies. Their bridge commander, Keir Thessel, narrowed his brows, as thermal maps showed ruptures in spatial entropy like filaments unspooling from reality. He watched as each image update left behind less data than the frame before. His bridge AI whispered across the rail, 27 ships, not destroyed, derealized. He raised his hand, whispering, without knowing why, "Say that again." Derealized, the AI repeated. Mass decontextualized from native field anchoring. Reformatting of object permanence values. "That's not a battlefield term," he snapped. "No. It's a philosophical engineering class designation." Council intelligence units monitoring from a non-Dominion platform scrambled to locate an attack pattern, but none emerged. No incoming mass, no kinetic trace, not even optical distortion. Their feeds became recordings of nothing happening, with ships simply gone between 2 timestamps. They tagged the event as a phantom vector collapse, unaware that what they were witnessing wasn't collapse, it was removal. In a classified data ring under Earth Command, Tavon Rilt stepped into the monitoring core, where Korn Dasel stood beside a suspended diagnostic orb. Dozens of heads-up feeds rolled around them, each screen bearing a separate stream, every one with a different Dominion sector. Each now housed the same shared alert. Vessel presence anomaly, invalidation by unobserved external causality. No weapons, no detonations, just removal from context. Basil turned to Rilt. Entropy doesn't explode. It's not dramatic. It just takes. Bryalt said nothing. He watched the last feed go blank. Across Dominion war rooms, the scene repeated. Officers barking orders into dead channels, issuing evasive protocols against threats they couldn't track or define. Some activated counter-intrusion firewalls meant for cybernetic sabotage. Others tried jamming unregistered signal bands. Nothing worked, because there was no attacker. There was only Halvern's conclusion, playing out like a theoretical proof nobody thought real. On the final working bridge before the network fell dark, a technician screamed across the console. "We have no target." Commander Doran snarled back. "Then it's not an enemy, it's a consequence. We cannot defend against a weapon that refuses to behave like one." The voice of Ambassador Karen Vall cut through the staggered frequency relay inside Council Command Hall 3. His face drained of its usual political tone. Dozens of leaders from affiliated species stared into their personal interface panels, the atmosphere heavy not with outrage, but with measured caution. Above them, laser Pellier briefings pulsed across environmental walls, broadcasting data clusters and failure logs recovered from the obliterated Dominion fleet. No wreckage, no enemy contact, no after-action trace. Only a list of ships that had, by technical classification, ceased to hold mass in known coordinates. And one line stamped across every strategic report. Entropic derealization. Non-classifiable event type. Confirmed. Terran-originated design signature. In the archival subcore of the Galactic Accord's Central Archive Tower, Council security systems recompiled their entire threat taxonomy. Threat level Omega-6, previously reserved for antimatter-based planetary cleansing devices, was now displaced. A new category entered the lexicon: severe class. Subtype Halvran. No tactical recommendation accompanied it. There was no countermeasure sheet, no threat response workflow, only a descriptor. Risk cannot be intercepted. Activation is post-ement confirmed only. Do not engage Terran design initiators under jurisdictional assumption. Do not broadcast threat response across open relay bands. Council factions with fleets within 6 jumps of Earth began issuing full strategic withdrawals. Not with public announcements, but through quiet evacuation orders, masked as resupply calls. 3 fleets altered anchor points entirely, repositioning around secondary trade worlds under the pretense of maneuver drills. Inside the inner council transmission node, a message loop played across encrypted diplomat feeds. Reference: Entropy Phenomenon Design. Tag: Halvern Class. Category: Existential Threat, Static/Passive Activation. Priority: All non-Terran designs to receive Scrub Diagnostic Crosscheck. Status: Do not engage without Accord-wide consensus. The message didn't end with a warning, it ended with nothing. A blank feed, no sign-off, no closing protocol. Back on Earth, Taven Rilt reviewed the Galactic System's broadcast archives from a dimmed conference cell. A heads-up band encircled the center wall, projecting a slow rotation of recently updated legal designations. At the center, a red vertical seal labeled Council Protocol Error, Halvern Class, Risk Confirmed. He didn't smile. This wasn't a victory. It was a repositioning. Earth was no longer ignored. It had become the one species whose engineer had proved irreversible consequence could be designed, not declared. A knock echoed behind him. The door opened without vocal prompt. Ambassador Drovek Karn stepped inside. His posture lacked its usual ambassadorial stiffness. "I'm requesting protected entry under Terran Protocol 6, he said plainly. Vrilt turned slowly. "We don't offer asylum to architects of executions." "I voted procedural, not personal," Karn replied. "And now I realize we were vetting engineers for malice when we should have been measuring for inevitability." Across other Council Peg worlds, policy forums splintered. Several factions began editing their own command doctrines to remove references to traditional weapon categories entirely. Varn representatives, what few remained with rank, refused to speak publicly. Their fleet command channels still hadn't recovered continuity from their vanished battle groups. A few tried to pin the collapse on internal malfunction, sabotage, even fabrication, but Earth didn't respond. And that lack of response said more than any statement. The planetary defense minister of the Yadari conglomerate issued an emergency briefing from his orbital security deck. Do not evaluate Halvran systems on military metrics. You are not facing destruction. You are facing erasure. This is not conquest. This is design logic enforcing itself. In the Accord's military analysis wing, panic took quieter form. Urgent white papers began to circulate with classification levels so high some weren't translated. One document titled Mass Event Behavior in Non-Kinetic Terran Systems proposed the idea that the Valcard nodes had no target registry at all, only conditional response parameters hard-catered to international behavior models. In other words, Halvran's system never needed to recognize enemies. It just needed to witness a decision. The tribunal verdict had been enough. Karn stood beside Rilt now, the former ambassador's voice lower, edges cracked by exhaustion. You can't let this shape the next age. Earth has weight now, enough to tilt the structure. Rilt folded his arms, expression unreadable. We didn't tilt it. We stabilized it. You just didn't like the equilibrium that formed after. Karn leaned forward slightly. What if others follow your lead? Bright's reply came with no emphasis, no performance. They won't understand the math. They'll try to make it louder. That's how they'll fail. By day's end, 28 Council species reclassified Earth from Tier 3 defense autonomy to non-negotiable passive sovereign status. The title didn't include any powers. It just meant one thing. You don't interfere. No contact was initiated with Earth. None was expected. In the Outer Rim Relay Network, 5 Terran tag devices blinked in sequence, their energy readings aligning across different orbital sectors. They didn't transmit. They didn't move. They listened. Do not adjust your spectrum range. We want you to see everything. Aaron Solk, Earth's high diplomatic executor, stood before a multispectral transmission podium, buried in the sub-vaults beneath the core assembly hall. No banners hung behind him, no emblems. Only a matte black backdrop of carbon thread weave so dense it reflected nothing. In the center, stitched without contrast, Earth's flag in blackout thread, the Terran sigil stitched in ink instead of light. He leaned forward slightly. No cue, no script. The channel feed had already linked to 92 outer system relay arrays. 86 had acknowledged reception. The remaining 6 hadn't failed. They had chosen not to respond. They would hear it anyway. Across the galaxy, every major political and military relay station received an emergency override on their primary diplomatic channels. Heads-up displays blinked once, then locked. All input systems froze, not in aggression but as a courtesy, to ensure clarity of message. The broadcast came in all layers: phased audio, adaptive language filter, gesture-coded subtext, and one raw frequency uncompressed for synthetic intelligences to analyze without interpretation bias. It was built to be undeniable. Mirren began speaking, his voice even, without inflection. Your verdict was rendered. Our engineer was executed. We observed. No blink, no pause. You labeled his contributions as offensive systems. That was incorrect. They were mathematical conclusions. Once triggered, they didn't strike back. They finished unfinished problems, problems left open by you. His hand remained still. No emphasis. The message wasn't for drama. It was for record. Inside the Dominion's remaining fleet chambers, commanders watched from private quarters. Some had sealed doors. Others stood alone in analysis rooms filled with the quiet pulse of operational data streams, blinking, unread, ignored. They couldn't interrupt the feed. In the Scarlinian Union broadcast tower, the relay board technicians tried to interject an automated response handshake but failed. The Terran channel didn't accept input. didn't negotiate spectrum collision, didn't throttle. It simply existed on top of the stack. Wolf moaned as he continued. We did not retaliate, there was no retribution, there was only sequence. He moved his hand to the terminal beside him. The heads-up interface responded instantly. Behind him, the black flag began to rotate. A slow pan, not an animation, but a real-time feed from a Terran orbital platform, capturing the flag turning above Earth's third atmospheric shell. No explosion, no fleet, just a flag in motion. Your judgment was public, so is ours. In council deliberation halls, political aides stared blankly at the feed. A few tried to mute the stream, only to find their controls disabled. Not locked, not broken, just not relevant. Councillor Rek Tarn, a military delegate from the Zarketh regime, whispered under his breath, "It's a gravestone with voice." No one responded. Mirren's eyes didn't move from the transmission lens. We do not issue ultimatums. We do not seek tribute. We do not intend to teach. But when taught by others through action, we respond by finalizing what they start. The image behind him sharpened, revealing the black flag slowly eclipsing the curve of Earth. The feed's fidelity was staggering. Each fabric strand caught in atmospheric diffraction, captured not for theatrics but permanence. This is our first and final communication on the matter. No further explanations will be provided. If questions remain, review your verdict logs. The causality chain begins with your decision. He stepped back from the podium. No cutoff was issued. The feed ended itself. Across dozens of worlds, the message remained displayed on loopless feeds for 1 full minute before auto-disengaging. On screens where local systems tried to record the transmission, all stored copies were corrupted. Not through hacking or firewalls, but due to incompatible formatting. The message wasn't designed to be replayed. It was meant to be heard once. Inside Earth Command's primary channel dome, Tavon Rylt nodded once. His interface lit green, signaling full transmission confirmation. No follow-up feed, no open communication relay. Just one action listed on the mission inlog. Message delivered. Status completed. Elsewhere, Ambassador Drovek Karn stood alone at a neutral relay point, eyes transfixed on a secondary observer feed. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. One of the relay techs near him whispered, "Do you think they'll respond?" Karn shook his head slowly. "There's no invitation to?" In a tertiary council archive buried beneath Kelmarin's orbital sector, classification subcores began uploading an updated entry into threat catalog systems. Terran precaution, non-interactive deterrent status. Engagement risk, conclusion, level, consequence. The designation had no counter-strategy. Back on Earth, in a sealed chamber inaccessible to diplomatic staff, the feed projector powered down. A single light remained on. A crimson node, small, the size of a nail, embedded in the wall beside the original mirror key socket. Daisel, watching from across the room, finally spoke. "They don't need to like it. They just need to remember it. We thought it was punishment, it was a correction." Commander Tavon Rylt stood in the observation ring of Orbital Node 3, the only platform above Earth authorized to operate without constant relay. Beside him, an automated telescope tracked a single object through a cold stretch of space. A derelict Terran satellite. One of the original Valkar nodes now inactive. Its entropy sync lights completely dark. It drifted above a barren neutral moon without signal, shield, or destination, and yet, every passing survey drone gave it a wide berth, as if still wary of what it could become. Behind Rylt, a junior intelligence liaison stepped forward, cautious. 3 more fleets disengaged this morning. One of them dropped beacons behind them. No comms, no statements, just static markers. Rylt didn't turn. Dropping anchors without returning? That's not diplomacy. That's retreat. The liaison waited a beat, then placed a small heads-up unit on the side wall. It bloomed with motion-synced data. Abandoned shipping lanes, halted recon missions. Restricted border expansions near Earth-designated territories. Everything around the planet had gone quiet, by design, not request. "What do we call this doctrine now?" the liaison asked. "Non-alignment?" "No," Riot replied. "We call it memory." Across the Varn Dominion, administrative collapse occurred, not with riots or revolution, but with defections. Planetary governors voided treaties, entire military quadrants decommissioned themselves, and high command vanished into bureaucratic fog. No blame was placed. There was no war cry. The fear wasn't of Terran warships, it was of unprovoked absence. In training centers across neutral worlds, simulation protocols were rewritten. Entire courses on kinetic warfare were retired in favor of entropy containment theory, with Terran system analysis now a mandatory discipline. One instructor at the Rovith Inter-Academy, himself a veteran of 10 border skirmishes, stood before a generation of cadets and spoke without slides or dramatics. Don't provoke what you don't study. Don't challenge what you never measured. And never assume a death world builds things to fight. They might just build things to finish. Within the Accord, classified protocol codices were amended quietly. System tags involving Earth no longer required approval for neutral pass-through designation. The flags didn't permit attack, espionage, or diplomacy without a minimum 5 council consensus. The policy's name was simple: Terran Contact Delay Directive. Its first line read, "Engagement deferred until causality certainty is established." No clause followed. In the subterranean archive beneath Earth's equatorial security ring, a relay board cycled through inactive node logs. Each had re-entered dormancy without command. No interference, no corruption. Just reversion to status complete. Horndaisel reviewed the stream alone, one finger tracing across analog records, etched into composite crystal slates. No screen, no artificial assistance. The slates were cold, brittle, and absolute. He reached the last one, where the Volcar system's root key had originally been defined by Halvran himself. Instead of an instruction, it displayed one sentence: designed not to retaliate, designed to conclude. On the far side of the galaxy, an unaligned collective known for opportunistic black site development issued a planetary lockdown when 3 of their stealth ships went missing near an abandoned Terran mining belt. They had engaged no targets, no transmissions had been made. The Council did not investigate. Instead, a recommendation was posted to internal defense networks. Do not approach untagged Terran assets, observation-only protocols advised. The entire system was later flagged red on Council exploration maps with the phrase, "Observational territory, entry not recommended." Back home, no new colonies were built. No warships deployed. Earth didn't make claims. It didn't expand. It didn't negotiate for territory. Instead, it updated a single line in its Strategic Command Manifest. Galactic presence. Static. The word meant something different now. Not stagnation, certainty. Inside the core assembly hall, Rilt walked past the sealed chamber where Halvran had once logged his system cores. The room had not been entered since the activation sequence ended. Not out of reverence, out of awareness. He paused briefly at the door. The locking mechanism showed no activity. It had never been unlocked. He placed a hand on the panel, not to enter, but to acknowledge the presence of something the galaxy still didn't understand. Something they didn't need to. From behind, Daisel's voice emerged, calm. "They're still watching, waiting for our next move." "There won't be one," Rilt replied. That was the move. He turned and walked away. The final transmission from Earth was recorded, not sent. A redundancy file meant only for historical review. It bore no metadata, no audio signature, just a single phrase encoded in Halvarin's original datafold. You never executed a man, you activated a protocol. In years to come, students of system warfare would refer to it as Halvarin's Law. A principle not of aggression or retaliation, but of irreversible consequence, built on comprehension far beyond the tools of traditional war. To challenge Earth was no longer to risk war. It was to tempt conclusion.